Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today it is the 4th of November and I will be going over the entire front line to make up for the days that I missed. But there wasn't that much that happened anyway, but I will be going over all the things that did actually occur. So starting with Kherson, we now have confirmation of Ukrainian units in both Novohrad-Nijeve and in this other town, Mala Sid Minucha. And so we know this because of this video that was geolocated to the town with a Ukrainian flag being raised over the town by the 61st Jaeger Infantry Brigade. And so I had previously marked these two towns as under Ukrainian control. So this is not a new occurrence. This is just a footage that was released as sort of a confirmation. But now we at least know that the Russian defensive line in this region of the Pavlivka bridgehead is centered around Kalvinivske and then from there Buskinske. And so Ukraine, they do have the opportunity to use this road to actually advance onto this minor town over here, potentially isolate it because of its proximity to the Inholets River. But in general, in Kherson, really, we've seen a relatively static front line for the past few weeks. We've just seen like continued probing attacks by Ukraine. I don't really have any additional information to report in that regard, just that there were some Russian sources from on the ground that were reporting on fighting in the direction of Trifonivka and Chervone. So that's certainly possible because these two towns are pretty close to the front line. Obviously, the line that we've been talking about for the past few weeks is around Piatikati and Duchani, but it is certainly possible that there was some back and forth and then the situation is fluid. You could have some like recon units going in and out of these two towns. It is not 100% under either side's control at the moment. That's what I would probably say. And so we don't even know if Novokamyanka is necessarily under Ukrainian control. It's possible that at a certain point it was, but that the Russians counterattacked and set up some defensive positions there. We genuinely don't know. And I don't think we'll know for a while until really we get additional information, because there really has been a lot of ambiguity in regards to Kherson. I will give an example of this because a few days ago we began to see rumors of the Russian troops leaving their checkpoints and outposts on the right bank of the Dnieper River in Kherson. So like in places like Berislav or Bilozerka, which is I think over here, this town over here, you do have some groupings of Russian forces. And so we saw all these rumors permeating that they were beginning to leave, cross the river, and that the flags on the administrative buildings were being taken down as the Russians were withdrawing. This really did not come into fruition. The flags are still there. I don't know why it was lowered in that one video, but it doesn't really matter. The Russian troops are still in their checkpoints. Nothing's really changed in that regard. The only thing that really changed in recent days in regards to the Kherson situation is the fact that there was announcements from the local administration in Kherson city that there would be, quote, round-the-clock curfews. So that means basically just like 24/7 curfews in the city as evacuations continue. There was also an official request by Putin that the civilians from the city withdraw urgently and as soon as possible. From Russian media on the ground that was interviewing some of the soldiers, we know that about 1,200 vehicles are transported across the river each day, and that about 5,000 civilians are being evacuated on a daily basis. And there aren't that many civilians left in this area. If my estimate will probably be that there were around 70,000, 100,000 people in the Russian-controlled area before the evacuations. And so it won't take that long for these evacuations to be fully completed. Now let's move on to the Vuhledar front, which is a very interesting part of the front line right now because, again, a lot of ambiguity. We don't necessarily know what's going on here. A lot of Russian sources have the map at around this river, the Kashlahach River, which is a pretty thin river, not that deep. So that's not necessarily a problem for crossing over, but we don't even know if the Russians are next to this river anymore, because we do have two pieces of footage that are relevant to go over. So first of all, we have this video of Ukrainians riding on the main road in Pavlivka. So this is the one that connects Pavlivka to some of the other towns like Prechystivka and Velika Novosilka. So you can see that they're riding pretty comfortably. They're not being hit with artillery shells or anything. And so that sort of implies that the Russians aren't in the town itself anymore. Also, we have this video of this Omega detachment from the Ukrainian National Guard capturing a T-80 tank from the Russians, which does also imply that the Russians were able to break through the original Ukrainian defensive lines in this farmland and these agricultural enterprises to the south, and that they actually made it to the town center. But then from there, they were probably pushed back, and they had to abandon some of their heavy equipment in the process. This also confirms that a lot of National Guard's troops are situated in Pavlivka. We did talk previously about the 1st Special Purpose Brigade from the National Guard of Ukraine. And so we also have another unit, the Omega Special Forces. And so they're all operating in this area. And it's also part of the reason why Russia was not able to continue their advance, because you had a lot of reinforcements being quickly sent into the front line. And they actually did play a big role in stopping the Russian advance. I'm starting to think that the entire point of this Russian advance was to just tie down troops, because really a lot of reinforcements were sent in, and they have clearly been able to stop the advance. There were also reports from the Ukrainians that the 155th Marine Brigade suffered some heavy casualties in the fighting. We also know that the 36th Motor Rifle Brigade was fighting in this area, but we don't have any specific information about that unit. We also heard reports from both sides of Russian attacks from around Novomayorsk towards Prechystivka, which might be sort of a last-ditch attempt to flank Pavlivka, so then the Russians can have control of at least a certain portion of the highway. So then from there they can advance towards the east and flank Pavlivka from 3 sides, forcing the Ukrainians out. That might be the only way left for the Russians to actually get control of this town, especially as more and more reinforcements are being sent in, and you begin to see a lot of defensive fortifications being built within the town. And of course, because almost all the civilians are gone by now, it could be sort of turned into a urban fortress. Obviously, it's not that large, but we've seen in a lot of these smaller scale settlements that Ukraine has been able to turn them into sort of urban fortresses and use it to their advantage. Also, attacks reported in the direction of Novomykhailivka. No reported changes. Now, in Marinka, we do have changes, so I will talk about this a little. In Marinka, we're seeing the 9th month of concurrent urban battles, very fierce. Now you're seeing a lot of Russian tanks rolling in, especially in the northern part of the town, fighting over the school building and some of the residential blocks, trying to reach this key warehouse, which is really across of Druzhba Avenue. Druzhba Avenue is really the main road dividing Marinka. It used to be the dividing line between the Russians and the Ukrainians, but it does seem as if at some point in September, maybe, or late August, early October, the Ukrainians were able to push back the Russians to a certain extent, because now we're seeing reports of Russian gains in really areas that I had previously marked as under Russian control. So I did overestimate their gains, or maybe they just withdrew at some point. So you can see all of these blocks over here, they've been recently taken by the Russians. They're basically leveled right now. You do still have some Ukrainian troops hiding in the remnants of these houses, but literally every single one has been damaged according to the Ukrainian authorities. The Ukrainian National Police, they actually say that every single resident of Marinka has been evacuated. And so now this is sort of turning into a pesky situation where there's 0 civilians left. And so both sides can really use it to their advantage. The Ukrainians can use it to their advantage by hiding in the residential houses, whatever's left of them at least. Meanwhile, the Russians, they can use the TOS-1 systems much more liberally than they were using them before, just to hit whatever troop concentrations of Ukrainians they can find. One last thing from this area is that from Krasnohorivka, there were reports that there will also be evacuations going on in this town. Before the war, there were about 16,000 people living in here, and now there are about 800 residents left, and they don't have any running water supply or electricity. And so, not only for humanitarian but also for military purposes, it is very important to get these people out. And moving on to the Donetsk airport and pesky front, there have been some minor changes, and I added in a few more markers with footage. So you can see in this video that the Russians were attacking a Ukrainian trench. I'm not sure which unit it was, but I'm pretty sure it was actually a Russian, not DPR unit. You can see the Ukrainians are fortified in literally every single bush line, every single hedgerow. And so every single one of these counts in order to make an advance. So even if the Russians are now in control of this specific line of bushes, and I would say now the no man's land is around this reservoir and this entire open area. So you probably do have another line of trenches around here where you have a road, and then also another one over here. And then around this line over here, there's also probably some sort of defensive fortifications. And so it's going to be a very arduous task to overcome all of these defensive fortifications, to even reach the other parts of Vodiane or to reach the eastern outskirts of Pavlivka. In Vodiane, we have footage of DPR heavily shelling the region, basically taking out any sort of troop concentrations. Usually it's Russians shelling Pavlivka, but you do have some DPR artillery as well. This is an older video, but again, heavy combat in this area. One last marker that I added in right before recording this video is of the Sparta Battalion taking over this bridge over here. You can see, I'll highlight it. This bridge over here was taken over, and Wargonzo actually reached this part of the front line, which is one of the most dangerous fronts and is incredibly close to where the fighting is going on. And so they took a photo of that bridge. And we know that the Sparta Battalion is operating in this area just to the south of Opitny. And given the fact that they're one of the best units that the DPR has, they will play a key role in the attempted taking over of this town, Opitny, in the near future. Now let's move on to the Bakhmut front, where the Ukrainian sources have reported various failed Russian assaults in the direction of Mayorsk, in the direction of Opitny, not Ivanhrad though, and so I'm still inclined to believe that Ivanhrad is under the Russian control. They also said failed attacks on Bakhmut, on Bakhmutske, the suburb over here, on Solidar, and on Yakovlivka. So really no gains by Wagner Group. There's also the potential that they actually lost some ground in some back and forth fighting over the past few weeks. One example that I want to mention specifically is over here, where there is actually footage of the 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade repelling the Wagner Group. This is just south of the clay deposit, and so it's possible that the clay deposit is under Ukrainian control or that it is no man's land, so I might have to change the map based on that. But you can see clearly in the video how the unit 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade is able to hold the line around this area, which does mean that they still have some defensive fortifications outside of Bakhmut that are still being utilized to prevent the battles from being shifting towards the urban center itself. Now let's move on to the Luhansk front, where we have reported attacks by Russia on Bielorussia and on Verkhnokamianske. No changes yet, but again, the fighting specifically in Bielorussia was mentioned and was reported as very fierce. And so this might be an effort by Russia to sort of stabilize the line around the Luhansk and Donetsk border. There was also some very heavy airstrikes and heavy damage inflicted onto the Ukrainian groupings in Serebryanka last night. Also, we have a lot of news from the Svatove-Kremina line, and specifically the outskirts of Kremina. Over the past few days, we've seen a lot of reinforcements being sent into Liman while they are sort of preparing replenishing their forces, getting ready for combat readiness. And so you're having these minor scouting units from Makivka or Nevsky or Terny and Pavlivka being sent into these forests, these forests that are very close to Crimea, either from the south or from the west. And so their goal is basically to probe the lines, very similar to what's going on in Kherson. Their goal is also to infiltrate the Russians' lines around Chervono-Popivka and Zhitlivka. A lot of Ukrainian sources are saying that the fighting is very close to those two towns and also to the town of Ploshchanka. And so that's certainly possible, but we don't have any confirmation of that yet. If there are reports of Ukrainians near these towns, and it's usually like these very small platoons or companies that are being sent in, and they usually have to withdraw before the Russian artillery barrage would destroy all of their men. And so the front line is really stabilized, especially around the Zherebets River. You can see here I made a lot of changes to the map. Now Karmazhanivka, I think that's how you say it, is under Russian control again, but I did add this town over here, Nadia, as under Ukrainian control just because the new front line is basically around the Zherebets River. I would say that Cherhivka and Raihorodka is basically a grain zone right now, and that the Russian line around Svatove is probably closer to the ditches around Patakakivka and Nezhurine. There was also a lot of heavy fighting reported around Kuzhamivka specifically, because you do know that the Ukrainians have a forward position around Stomakivka, which is very, very close to the highway, the Svatova highway, only about 2 miles, 2.5 miles away from the highway. And so from there, they would be able to put pressure onto Kuzhamivka and not only gain control of the highway road, but also on this smaller road, which is necessary for supplying the front line. We also had reports of very heavy fighting around Kislivka and this line from Kislivka to Yehidny. So it's also possible that based off of that Stepova, Novoselivka, and Ivanivka are under Ukrainian control. If the fighting is closer to Yehidny, maybe the map looks more like this, where the front line is around this road over here that I'm going to highlight in yellow. I'm not exactly sure. No one really is, so I want to remain cautious. One of the main units involved in this is, of course, the 14th Brigade. I will try to find them for you on the map because I know I have them marked. Here you go. This is a mechanized brigade. They've been launching many mechanized attacks in this direction around Kislivka for a while. They're also situated in and around Dvorichny, where they do have some units that have been fighting, trying to break through. They have been in this sort of bridgehead for a while, and they've not been able to expand the bridgehead towards Pavlivka because the Russians sent in reinforcements to this area. We actually have a geolocation of the Ukrainians hitting Russian positions in Dvorichny, which does confirm that it is still contested, in that the Ukrainians were pushed back a little in this area. Perhaps they were even forced to withdraw back across the Oskil River. We did also hear previously that the Russians were in control of the railroad that was passing through Dvorichny. So maybe the situation looks more like this, where you do still have like row units moving through the government offices, gas stations, elementary schools, and part of the road connecting Dvorichny to Hryaniivka. That is certainly possible. But it's not a big enough force to really do anything else besides tying up Russian forces further up to the north. According to some Russian sources, they are still situated in this area, and they are being resupplied with pontoon bridges and with boats. And so that's how they were able to sustain themselves. But really, that's it for today. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later.